Florida and or Texas?
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, we are live.
All right.
Welcome, everyone. We're so excited that you could join us today. We got started a little bit late today, but that's okay. We're still here. Thank you so much for joining us on Tuesday. We have a really important topic that we wanted to discuss. We're talking about book banning and what that's about and what books are being banned. And we hope that you'll be a part of this conversation to share your experiences or your thoughts around the topic. Again, thank you so much for spending time with us. We really appreciate it. My name is Kamilah Bywaters. I am running for the Board of School Trustees in District E. That area is Summerlin, Spring Valley, and some of Blue Diamond. And what's really important to me is that our community has an opportunity to get to know me, understand what I think about important topics that are pressing in our community regarding education. You are definitely able to join the Zoom if you would like to be on the Zoom with us. You can also engage with us on the Facebook Live. I want to say thank you to all those individuals who were engaging last week. We love that engagement. We love the questions, and we're going to do better with making sure that we're looking at those questions and your comments throughout the show. Thank you so much for joining. Rodney?
Hey, everybody. Welcome to all of our listeners in Zoom, all of our listeners in Facebook Live now, and those who listen to Facebook later. We appreciate all of you all tuning in. We appreciate the comments that you give us as we're doing the show, but we also appreciate the feedback as the week progresses. That type of engagement is really necessary for ongoing discussion and help us research some facts. And that's what we're going to try to give you is facts. Our topic today is very timely because there are books being banned in various cities, states, and counties. And what is behind books being banned? Is it a good thing, not a good thing, maybe not sure about what type of thing? And what's behind suddenly banning books? Throughout history, we know that countries who typically ban books, they don't look too good in the lens of history. How will we look to those who come after us with the books that we're banning? So welcome to the show. Please put some messages in the chat, whether on Facebook or here in the Zoom, and let us know what you're thinking. And if you have questions, we want to hear that too. And don't forget, Ms. Kamilah Bywaters is running for school board of trustees. And I wanted to hit on that again because who else is reaching out to you like this on a weekly basis, giving you an opportunity to not just see her face, but to actually engage, not just with talking points on paper, but where you get to engage with her. You get to comment, you get to ask questions for a greater understanding. What other candidate for school board of trustees is doing that? And for that matter, what other candidate has done that? Well, we have a new sheriff in town, so to speak. We have the millennials are taking over. It's time for some of us old folks to move out the way and give them room and let them stretch. And that's what Ms. Bywaters is doing in this campaign. So Kamilah, let's get on it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's really important as we think about who we choose to lead us. It is very important that you have leaders who are engaged with the community, that they understand the vibes, understand the pulse, and understand what's going on, not only nationally or from a global perspective, but also from a local perspective as well. And, I'm not afraid to say, I don't know something, I'll look it up, I'll research it. As you know, I am a doctoral student. I just finished my comprehensive exams yesterday. So I am breathing. That is probably one of the most intense tests that I have taken in my life because it is basically a comprehensive exam that pushes me to determine if I really am an expert in my chosen field and space of study. So that the test was actually very hard, but we made it through. And it's really important that you have an opportunity to meet me, understand how I think, and to be transparent about education. And it's really important to me that the community asks me the tough questions, because I'm not afraid to answer them. I'm not afraid to speak the truth. And I really look forward to this conversation. The topic.
Sister Kamilah,
Yeah.
before you go on a little further, I want to foot stomp and knock on the board. Oftentimes when we go to the school board meetings, some of the comments that I read about and some of the things I hear is none of these people are professionals. They don't, they're just parents. Now, I always take exception to the just parent part because that's the most important job that any of us will ever have in our entire lives. But not only is Sister Kamilah a parent, not only is she an educator, and not only is she going back to school for more education, but she is also someone who went through this school district. So academically, experience, avocation, all of the things that we normally say we want to see in somebody who sits on that board is embodied in this one person, Miss Kamilah Bywaters. So now that I've gotten that, I want you to know who you're really talking to. This person has a vested interest in the success of the school system for herself, her family, and also for those that she educates. So we're serious about this. She's serious about this. And now that we have all of those accolades out of the way, but most importantly, so that you know who you're speaking with, let's get into this. Let them know what we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. So today we're talking about banning of books. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history behind that. And I know there's some movements across the country to ban books. And in my research, I found that, and in my research and also in what I'm hearing at school board meetings, is that there is a push to ban books that talk about Black history. Some of our phenomenal writers who talk about Black issues, the Black story, are being proposed to be banned. And then also books that have to, that embrace our LGBTQ family as well. So any books that are gender affirming, those are also books that are being placed up for bans. And I know here in our state that there are one particular group that I know of that is hosting like meetings around teaching groups and individuals on how to fill out the applications to ban books. It's happening here in our state with the Moms for Liberty. And if you have not had an opportunity to research Moms for Liberty, it's really important that you understand the method to their madness. They come off in the community as very, we're here for parents, but there's a specific agenda behind their message and their movement. And I'm going to make sure that I put in the chat some of the organizations that Moms for Liberty are actually a part of on a global perspective. One being Project 2025, and I'll place that information in for you all to look at that and to see the what the plan is. But I do want to say that for full transparency, I had an issue with, we had some families that contacted LAVAPSI because there were some issues at Faith Lutheran with some books that children that was a part of their curriculum. One of the books was called Emily the Rose. I believe it's called Emily the Rose. And in the book, it was written by a white writer, a white woman author. And the book really just put Black people in an inferior position. The N-word was all in throughout the book. And there really was, it was offensive to the students. So parents reached out to LAVAPSI like, hey, this is happening. We are so offended. And I did on the news because I was really upset, highly upset that the school was not listening to the parents' perspectives. I think this is a really good conversation because we are going to come, and anyone wants, you can jump in at any time. We are going to come across books that we don't agree with. And I definitely did not agree with that book. And in my emotions, because this is out there, it's on the news. So in my emotions, I said, I'm going to work to ban this book from the school. But it was brought to my attention. And I, after like really thinking about that if we engage in the practice of banning books for things that we don't like, then that opens the door for everyone else to do the same. So I do not agree with banning books, even though that hurt my feelings and I was hot and mad and on the side of my parents who were having an issue. What we did do was had a conversation with the school. We talked about how this made the students feel. And because of this book that was being shared at the school, calling students the N-word, the students actually started calling the Black students N-words, and they ended up having 5 students were RPC. So it was a big drama and a mess. So it is a controversial topic. I do not agree with banning books because it opens the door for other groups to say, hey, well, I don't like this book about Rosa Parks. So I think this is a part of the conversation. What do we do when there's something that is offensive that we don't like? What choices do students and families have?
I'm glad you brought that up because one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves as we go through this process is, are all books of value at all ages? So in other words, maybe a book is for a high schooler would be okay, but maybe for a 3rd grader, it's inappropriate. Now, that doesn't mean that you're banning the book from the system, but as responsible adults, we do have a job to determine what is appropriate for our children, what is age appropriate. So for years, we gave away 10 books for 1,000 students. And so that's 10,000 books. And many of these books were collected from the community. That old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure. So we would specifically ask for used books that people were no longer using. Maybe their children had grown up, so they still had their children's books there, or maybe they were avid readers as adults, but they got these books handed down to them and they were no longer necessary. Maybe they have them on their phone or their tablet or what have you. And so we would get these books, and then we had folks from CSN, students from CSN would actually go down and they would determine which books were grade appropriate for the students. And then we would ask the parents to be the guide as their students went down the road to pick books, because it's important for students to pick their own books. And if they ventured into a book that maybe they're an elementary school student and this is a high school book, we would hope that their parents would be judicious in helping guide them to what was appropriate. So do you think that age appropriate books are a real thing? Or should children be able to read whatever the heck that's out there?
Yeah, I think that's a very important conversation around what to read. I think there needs to be age appropriate, and then also when we're talking about schools, curriculum appropriate. So what's appropriate for the topic that we're discussing? And then what is appropriate for the community that's within my classroom? Because we know that research has showed us, and this is a known thing, that 80% of our teaching population are white women. And we do not do a good job holistically across the country with implementing culturally relevant, responsive, or sustaining pedagogies, which means that we're not doing a good job of ensuring that our teaching practices are responding to the needs of our diverse population of students. So my argument becomes that there has to be deep planning and meaningful planning when you're determining what types of materials to use as a part of your learning experiences. And for example, just for the issue that happened with my students with our students at Faith Lutheran, the Black students felt degraded. They felt dehumanized, because every book that they were reading, most of the books that they were reading were downing and degrading Black people, using the N-word, you're dirty, you're trash. And they did not feel like that their voice was being heard about how they were being impacted by the reading. So I would say that, yes, it needs to be age appropriate, curriculum appropriate. And this is right. This is also a great opportunity where teachers and leaders could bring families together and discuss, like, hey, these are the books that we're going to talk about and discuss. We may not agree on all of them, but let's do a deep dive. This could be a great way to engage students and their families, and to also not to surprise students with controversial topics that may come up in the books. So I do think that there needs to be some, and that's why teachers plan. Planning is a really big part of determining what you're going to teach, because you plan. You should go through your materials, know what's in there, and then prepare students and their families, and then allow families to have the choice if they would like to participate or not.
So the general has put in the chat that Texas has banned more books than any other state. Texas. Now, I looked at one of the books on the list was a book called The Learning Tree. And The Learning Tree is a really small book. It's one of those books that you would read maybe in late elementary school or junior high school. And the book is talking about a Black family and how it has to progress through the systemic racism. That is, and it's sort of a story of triumph as they go through this process. And it's also a story of family, which you would think some of these folks would want to hear about. But it's on the banned book list. Rosa Parks was on the banned book list. Oh, here's one. Amanda Gorman, the young lady at the presidential inauguration, on the banned book list. Think about this. So I think it's very important that we have to know what's being done, and we have to speak up about it. I happen to love Amanda Gorman because I love her poems. Now, just because I love her poems doesn't mean that she should or should not be on the banned book list. But what is the stratification? How do they determine what books should be banned? In some states, in some counties, it can be a single person, one, that says that makes me feel a little uncomfortable. Well, you know what? When I had to open my algebra book, every time I opened it, it made me feel a little uncomfortable. But I had to learn that algebra because it was important. And so when we have books like The Learning Tree, you have books like Rosa Parks, there are important lessons that might make us feel uncomfortable. And maybe feeling a little bit uncomfortable is what helps us break out of whatever stagnant paradigms we have and progress us forward. So feeling uncomfortable, and one person, because the way it goes, that being the case, algebra would have been taken out of the entire New York City school district because it made me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. And that is something that we have to sit with and struggle with, because, it's uncomfortable to read the truth. And especially when in regards to Black history and our trajectory as a people, it's uncomfortable to read what has happened to our community. It's uncomfortable to read in your literature the N-word. And I think we do have to sit with it and then also make informed decisions that are best for our students and families at the time. But one thing I did want to say in my research, I'm studying teacher identity through the use of teacher narratives and teacher identity. And my premise is that teachers need to engage in identity work so that they can better understand their own personal lives, their experiences, how their ideologies have been shaped, and then how they implement practices in their classroom based on how they were raised and the experiences that they've been through. But before I get to this topic, I did a high-level overview, a deep dive into the history of education. And book banning is a colonial practice, and it's grounded in prior to the formation of education that we have now, like during the 15th century, education was really about, it was a religious, Protestant, Eurocentric ideology focused on moral behaviors. The men went to work, the women were the teachers, they were at home with their children, teaching them the Bible. So when I hear about book banning, it's like, oh, it's like a going back. Let's go back to read what we want you to read, which is the Bible, and use that as our guide to lead us throughout our journey in life. That's what it's reminiscent of, and it's very it's violent. It really is violent to tell a group of people that your books do not matter when you most likely do not relate to the history or the stories or the narratives that are being told. And in my work with narratives, I love a good story. I love a good story. And that's what our books are doing. They're telling stories about their slave narratives, their historical accounts of Black history, of inventors. And those are the books that people are wanting to ban because it's erasure. It's erasure.
So for those who want a little more history about books, the Gutenberg press is what revolutionized and caused the proliferation of books. And the Gutenberg press purpose, the reason for inventing the Gutenberg press was because religious texts, what we call Bibles, were rare. So only the high holy people possessed the knowledge of what they believed to be the words from their deity. And so they could say whatever they wanted to say because they held the book. In other words, they had possession of the knowledge. Ye who controls the knowledge controls the minds of the people, right? And the Gutenberg press was invented so that this religious text, the Bible, could be spread out amongst the masses so they can read it for themselves. So we know that religion played a large part in giving us books in the first place, as we have them today. Once that happened, though, and so what it did was it actually took power away from a small group of people and then gave it to the masses. We call that democratization. That's supposed to be a good thing, right? Well, now we see that we're trying to take books from the masses, and a minority of people control what books that the masses get. And if we use the example from the past with the Gutenberg press and the religious text, that means those people who control the knowledge, they control the books, they control the narrative, they determine the direction for all of us. And so instead of democratization is what it originally did with the Gutenberg press, they're trying to take us back to a time when only maybe the Pope and the bishops had the knowledge. And so as a democratic republic with a constitution, with democratic being in who we are, we want democratization. We want everyone to have as much knowledge. There's 300 and what, 25 million, 340 million people in this country. We want them to have a wide berth of knowledge. No one has to know it all. One final tidbit on the history of this, because most things are rooted into racism and white supremacy, to be quite honest. And so I always tell people, look up the United Daughters of the Confederacy, because these are people who were responsible for book banning in the late 1800s, and really they amped up their game in the 20th century. So the United Daughters of the Confederacy were usually on school boards. They were also, textbooks have to go through an approval process. And the United Daughters of the Confederacy made sure that their members were representative and usually the majority on these committees to determine what were the appropriate books for schools. Now, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, by their name, were pro-Confederacy. They were also pro-lost cause. So a book that would be fine for them to read would be Gone with the Wind, because it gives a very nice narrative of slave life and the antebellum era. But a book that something that they may not want students to read, if we move it up into more modern times, is Why We Can't Wait by the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because in that book, he's telling us as a people, and specifically as Black people, is that the rights guaranteed under the Constitution, the time for it is now, and we shouldn't have to wait, because we already had to wait well over 100 years during his day. So that is sort of the history of book banning in this country, is that it was based on racism and also perpetuating the lost cause narrative that planted seeds of hate that were sort of underground. I mean, like just under the soil. And then when X45 came and opened his mouth and started spewing fertilizer, I'm gonna call it fertilizer, and that nourished those seeds and brought up a very big crop ready for harvest of a lot of hate and some of the same tropes that they discussed in the 1800s and now into modern times.
Yeah, thank you for that historical account. It's really important to understand the history, because I always think, okay, where is the root of this? Where is this coming from? And it continues to evolve and continues to try to spread like a wildfire. And I think it's very important that we understand the history behind a lot of the issues that are really not new. They're just resurfacing. Like there's nothing new under the sun. And I think it is a wake-up call for our community to, I feel like every once in a while we have these wake-up calls to pay attention and to not allow this to happen, because this is not about democracy at all. This is about one group of people saying what they believe is knowledge and who deserves to have it. And this is a historical, what is the word I want to use? This is the historical foundation of American society. You know, we were started on violence and harm and not wanting to have a democracy and having a few at the top. And if we don't have people in place to disrupt these types of systems, it will continue, and people will come back, and little by little, as we see at the school board meetings, little by little, they're planting the seeds in there. Little by little, they're using tactics to get people to listen to them. And then at the end of the day, you find out you have an application now to ban books. So it's really important that we're paying attention and that we're aware of what's going on, not only in our state, in our city, in our locality, but this is a global happening all around the world. And we have to make sure that we are paying attention. Like anytime news comes across my phone, I'm like, okay, let me look and see what I'm gonna read today. What's going on today? And that it's very important that we stay on top of the news and reading the newspaper and staying abreast of what's happening. Because if we don't pay attention, we're gonna find that we will have 300 books banned here in our state.
So another book that's on the banned book list is a book called The Handmaid's Tale. Now, The Handmaid's Tale, if you've read the book or sort of series,
Mm-hmm.
and you see people like Mike Johnson as the Speaker of the House, or for that matter, some of the other more religious, seemingly anyway, religious people who are in Congress. In that book, there's a group of people who overthrow the United States government, very similarly to what we saw in 1/6. And they're called the sons of Jacob. And then they create this new uh, evangelical utopia called Gilead. And one of the things that they do in Gilead is they hang homosexuals, uh, people that they consider who have alternative lifestyles, they hang them. Another group of people that they hang are intellectuals, people like you, uh, Sister Kamilah, people who've read books other than the books that they want you to read. They hung those people. They put those people in camps. They removed them from the general population so that they could not, in their words, poison the other groups of people. And then they created systems, and then they took power away from women. They made it unlawful for women to read. And the reason why I pointed that out is because those things may start off with this group or that group, usually these non-white groups. As time progresses, so does the dominion and control and power of these people. And it ultimately comes back after they got rid of people who look like me, after they get rid of Jews, after they get rid of LGBTQ people with a different lifestyle in themselves. Then they start working on people who have different religious beliefs, Islamophobia, and so forth. But then they sort of bring it home. And when I say by what I mean by bring it home is they bring it to their own women. And then they start to take autonomy. Wait a minute, where is that happening now? Texas, once again. There's a woman in Texas who is pregnant, wants children, and unfortunately, her doctors are telling her there's going to be problems with the birth of the child. More than likely, the child will be stillborn. And if not, these children historically only live a few days outside of the womb. And by the way, it's going to cause ruptures in her womb, to put it politely, and she may not be able to have children in the future. Her doctors have agreed to this, but the court has says, no, you cannot have an abortion. So ultimately, the woman had to leave the state of Texas to get the reproductive health care that she needs. Now, I believe Texas passed a law, at least they were talking about it, that even if you leave the state, and Idaho was trying to pass the same law, that even if you leave the state, once you come back, you're subject to punishment. Anyone who helped you in transit is subject to punishment. Different states have different versions of this law. Now, I call it the Fugitive Woman Law. During slavery, it was called the Fugitive Slave Law. And what I'm trying to do is show you how oppression, though it may happen with one group at one time, eventually will be with multiple groups in this time. So book banning, controlling the knowledge, though that's something that started out in ancient times, we've seen it in the early portion of the development of this country, and now we're seeing a resurgence of it. We're not saying that every child should be able to read every book, but what we are saying is don't base it at least on just what one person likes or dislikes compared to another. Does any of our listeners, do you have any questions or comments on what we've discussed so far? Just jump in if you do, or put something into the chat.
Smart. First, I want to say I'm loving this this conversation, and I'm glad that you both opened up the way that you did. Because honestly, I'm in this conversation. I should say this topic in a lot of different circles, and I've heard a lot of different perspectives on this, and I have my own free thinking perspective on this subject. And honestly, I was concerned but pleasantly surprised and relieved that for the most part, this is not a one-sided or one perspective conversation. In looking at, I know you mentioned Texas, and then Florida has the second most books that are banned, but there's 21 states that have lists of books that are banned, but those two have the most. When I look at a lot of the ones that are banned, and from my own opinion for myself on certain books, as I examine I've even looked at some of the books on the Moms for Liberty list and say, why is it that they take this stance? I want to stand for myself, from my own perspective, not someone else's perspective or narrative, not even theirs or anyone else's. And I look at some of the things like in genderqueer that on the surface, I don't think is age appropriate for when you look at the graphics and some things in it is appropriate, and that I think that's for parents to decide, not the school or other people. Not the subject matter. I agree. It's fine. Everyone has a right to be or should be represented. I don't believe in banning at all. Period. Regardless of anything. So I was glad to hear that. But I think when we say one group is trying to ban and we dismiss other groups who have banned books like Huck Finn and Dr. Seuss and To Kill a Mockingbird, I don't think it's fair to say it's one group or even one side of the aisle if you take it to a political arena. But again, I don't agree with banning, period. There's a book called Flamer that's like number 2 on ban list. I actually have the book, and it's actually a good book, but it's on Moms for Liberty's list. It tells the plight of a young boy grappling with his sexual orientation. There are a lot of boys who are living that could resonate and might find it encouraging. So again, I don't think any book should be banned, but I wonder what the definition of banned is. Not wanting it in a high school library is not the same thing as banned. So I question whose definition of banned are we using here?
So
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I've read some of those books and excerpts for some of those books. And there are some books, by the nature of the book, should definitely have some consideration, as we talked about.
You're on mute, Rodney.
Thank you. I dropped off for a minute. Age appropriateness and parents should have input, no doubt about it. Because I've looked at some of those books and the graphic nature when it involves certain types of sex, as an example, and the full description on a street level of language, which most children, they may know that language already, but I would prefer that they learn the proper terminologies for some of these things first, right? So I wouldn't say that necessarily needs to be a book that's banned, whether it's talking about heterosexual sex, because we do need to have reproductive education. It's astounding how many people who go through our school system and don't really know what's going on with the second most important part of their body. Because, a lot of things cannot be working, but that's something that's going to work, because the idea of us is to reproduce ourselves. And that's why our reproductive system is so powerful next to our brain and circulatory and nervous system. So, but we have to look at these books. Yeah, you're right. We shouldn't look at it from a particular left or right stance. We should look at it, though, as what is appropriate, as Sister Kamilah says, for what we're teaching, and that level of understanding for that particular group. So I am a fan of Huck Finn. I am a fan of those books back in those days. With the right teaching, when you're having discussions on these books, they can definitely help us understand a lot more about our history, especially around race. But without the teacher giving that guidance, then it becomes just a lot of the N word and the this, that, and the other, and it loses the proper perspective.
So could that same question to books like Genderqueer and Flamin' and other things without the proper context, which some parents are saying, listen, I don't want to ban the book, but I want to be the one to have that conversation with my child, not have my ninth grader go into the library and get these books and since you've seen Genderqueer, I don't know people seeing it, but the graphics in that book, I mean, my God.
What's the name of the book?
Genderqueer.
And it's in schools?
I don't know. I'm not saying it's in schools. I don't know. I'm saying it's on March for Liberty's list, and it's like number one in a lot of banned lists. And when I look at it, and I agree with Brother Rodney is saying, I think it's an age appropriateness issue, not whether the book should be banned, because it's still someone's perspective, and it's still in a place where we should have freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I don't think anyone should be banned, period. It's just a matter of age appropriateness and parental oversight.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's important is that we have to also understand the narrative. As a person who's been in schools, I have not seen any sexual explicit books in K through 12. So, and I know there's lots of books. There's lots of books in the library, but I haven't seen that. And I also haven't seen medical facilities in schools that are giving out pills to kids. So that's why I think it's absolutely important that we do the research, we speak to librarians, and I wasn't able to get a librarian on here today. Hopefully we can find someone to join at another time and talk about this part, but I haven't seen anything that in schools. So I don't know. I haven't seen that part, but it is important that we do the research and we understand like the collection of our library. You know, we can go to schools and have those conversations with librarians, but it is important that people are going to write about who they are and their experiences in books, and that's where we are. And people should have the freedom and the grace to do so. And, you know, it is very important that we as a community, we have to also understand that education is $1 billion industry. So we have corporations who know nothing about anything, but they're developing books. So for example, there was a complaint at a charter school where the history class, one of the lessons in their, I can't remember I don't want to say the name of the company. It was a big company that makes books for schools. And the question that the students were asked was, if you lived on a plantation and your family was going to escape, would you escape or would you stay? And the teacher and the students thought that was a very inappropriate question to ask students. Not only are you asking Black students this question, you're asking non-Black and white students this question too, which for me is like, that's, you know, yes, we may think about these topics, but to me, it's like a source of trauma. You know, we're asking kids to think about whether or not, if their family left the plantation, would you leave? That wasn't like, it's like they're kind of romanticizing that type of scenario. Like that scenario, if a family was leaving or running away from their plantation, that was a crime. That was a tragic situation. It impacted a lot of people and it resulted in death and beatings and stuff like that. So those are type of things that are happening in some of our curriculum that, one, there just needs to be, I can imagine that this company, their diversity table is very small. I could imagine they have a table of people who all look like them, where there was no people who maybe one, but I'll give them one person who could possibly say, hey, let's think about this. But I could guarantee you that most of the people at the table did not have a diverse perspective to say, hey, let's think about this a little more and really think about the impact that it would have on teachers and students as we're asking students about these types of situations. And for me, I think one thing that is very interesting to me is Black issues are always elevated. And rarely do we see these same types of conversations happening about other racial groups in this manner. And to me, it's really red flaggy. I'm red flagging it. But this is why it's very important that we're a part of our children's education, that we're talking to leadership and being a part of the discussions around what types of curriculum materials are being chosen for our students and the impact of that work on our students' lives.
We have about 11 minutes left before we have to end this robust conversation. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about, one of the books that, or one of the topics that I hear our young people who are exiting high school and some even college, right here in Nevada in the Clark County, is they talk about how little government that they learn. And as we're on this discussion of book banning and what books should and shouldn't be, what the curriculum should or should not be, I was thinking, why isn't it that we do have more courses in government and politics? Since in order to be a good citizen, you have to know how our government works. You have to know how to process the politics of it. And so that is a form of exclusion. And that exclusion is almost like book banning. Well, we're not going to teach people how to be good citizens, and we're not going to have the books available to them in that. And we're not going to put it in the curriculum until they get into, I think it's the second half of the 11th grade for high schoolers. And then I think, where my educators, I think it's in 7th or 8th grade for middle school. And that's it. And if we have educators, if I'm speaking out of turn, please correct me. But that was my experience when I was involved in the CCSD. And I always thought, and so when you talk to students who graduate, one of the things they say is, I don't understand how our government and how our political system works. So they've, in a sense, banned knowledge on something that's important for them to be productive citizens. So we have to look at it in more than just what sometimes seem to be extreme sexual connotations, because that's usually what's brought up is, well, they're talking about this that's sexually inappropriate, whatever it is. But also let's talk about the fact that they don't educate our children on areas that they need to be productive citizens, and they don't include those books either. So book banning should be a jump off point for us, not just in the extremes, but also I'm thinking our form of government is not an extreme topic, but yet where are the books for that? Where is the curriculum for those things?
Rodney, the U.S. history is a junior 11th grade class, and government is usually a senior class. And I can't even imagine being a government teacher now, really trying to talk about government in most classrooms because it's so controversy and everything. But I have gone into the rooms. The good government teachers will have hefty conversations going, but I could just see it now turning into a big somebody called the principal the next day over something they may say. So they have to really walk on water now.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the things I remember from my childhood, and I was educated in the New York school system, is that we actually started learning U.S. history in elementary school. And as I progressed through life, what I learned as the foundation of United States history has benefited me, because they gave me just straight history. They didn't necessarily color it one way or the other, except the part about leaving England. So it wasn't 100% accurate, but it was kind of close. So, but what it did do was it provided me with a filter for ignorance, misinformation, and disinformation in this stage, in adulthood, in this stage of my life now. So I'm one of those advocates that some of these subjects that we may think are too hard for our children, No, we need to at least introduce them to some of these topics. And the earlier we introduce them, and I'm sure there's plenty of people much smarter than me can determine how much and what it is that we share with our young people, and then build it as they go along. And that becomes the filter for a lot of the misinformation and disinformation that we have now. I think there was a comment in the chat.
No, I don't see one. I don't see.
Okay.
I see Darlene. I want to just shout out Darlene because she's on in the Facebook Live. She had quite a few comments.
Oh, wow.
I'll just say one of hers. She talked about the community having a decision to evaluate curriculum and age appropriateness of that curriculum earlier in our conversation. So I wanted to make sure I checked her out.
So to the parents, when you were in school, when did you ever receive a notice to review curriculum? And don't everybody throw your hand up all at once.
No notice.
For those of you on Facebook, please put in the comment section how many times you were requested to review books and or curriculums. Go ahead, Brother Martin.
No, I was saying once when my daughter was in school, that's when they were just starting to introduce the topics of homosexuality, and they wanted permission to discuss that topic with my child. I think she was 14 or 15 at the time. And at the time, I was at a different level of enlightenment. I'll say that. And I was opposed, so I didn't sign it at all. But I know there were, but to answer your question once, so I don't want to still.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. You can elaborate. But,
So,
I haven't never gotten anything about that. But I do know when it comes to movies and stuff, they'll send you a notice about a movie.
Yeah.
But that's about it. If it's like over rated G, then they'll send to get permission.
So it's interesting that they will do it for a movie. But what about the other things that our students are learning? And so what I'm not trying to say is that it's the teacher's fault or anything like that, because us parents, we have to be engaged and we have to push not just the teachers, because the teachers have bosses called administrators, right? So it's really the administrators. We have to push these administrators to sort of give us what we believe our children need and not just accept what they give us, because what they're giving us might not be what they need, and what they're holding back might be what they need. And one of the ways that you combat ignorance, one of the ways that you combat racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, you go down the list, is you educate people. You let them know. Somebody said to me the other day that they're trying to make America a land of immigrants, and we got to stop it. And I thought, I wonder what school system did this person matriculate through? Because the whole premise of our country is a country of immigrants. And it just made me wonder, what are we teaching our children? What are we allowing them to be taught? And what are we allowing them to hold back? And in book banning, what important topics should our children have that they're missing out on when those books are removed, whatever they are? Fahrenheit 451, that's another one that's on the list. One of my favorite books as a child. It truly helped shape my mind on how I as an adult should interact with society. So us parents, and even those who are not parents, we have to be more engaged, and we need to push the administrators for our children to have a much broader education in areas that might be a little uncomfortable. Yeah. Donna, do you have a quick comment or question?
Yeah, Rodney, thanks for noticing my hand was up. Hello, Kamilah and Martin, and I believe the general's on.
Yes.
Happy holiday to you before I start. But I find it interesting, since now I have great-granddaughters, the eldest 9, I find it interesting that they're so concerned about books, but I mean, these kids can basically turn on their phone and get whatever information they need.
Right.
And there's no ban. I was walking through my living room. Most of the time, the TV watches me. I don't watch it. And there was this show called, oh, I can't even remember it, but it was, like you were saying, Martin, it was graphic. I mean, there was no question what was going on in this show. And I looked at the time and it was 8 o'clock. And I thought, we're talking about books, but we're really not getting down to what I feel the bottom line. And that was when I was young. I know it's old school, but my mother said, "You're not watching that." And we weren't watching that. Okay. Of course, I have 5 TVs in my house, so I have to go around like a policeman, but still, we weren't watching that. And I think that the other part of this is I strongly feel like this whole thing is just as you had said, the handmaiden's tale. They're trying to get to that. And I guess my thought in my head is, okay, what do I do as a citizen to stop that? I'm short of going like a lot of these people, going nuts and clearing out a room. I mean, what tools do we have? And I hope you guys will have a second to this so that you can share with us some processes that we can follow. My granddaughter says she's coming with the girls. The girls will be in one of these schools. I'm really nervous about that. And I'm thinking about homeschooling. So I really like to know how citizens make their voice heard on these items, because banning books is, I feel, unbelievably ridiculous and stupid, because anything I need to know, all I have to do is ask Chat GPT and it will tell me where to go, what paragraph, what page. Right. And young kids are not trying to read books. So I think the thing in the middle there is that teachers trying to teach from that book and using their bias when they teach, as all of us have witnessed, David and Ann, and here's little black guy and you be the maid, back in my day. Of course, as we progress, it's just a little bit different, but it still says the same thing. So, I just think that banning books is completely ridiculous, because you got to pick it up, you got to open it, and you got to read it. And I tell you what, my Audible keeps me on track. So these young kids are going to do the same thing. So government, in my mind, let me be quiet because I'll get on my soapbox, but politics and government, they're all headed for that one thing, and that is control of everything. And our kids are so TikTok and DickDock and whatever. Okay, that's what they believe. It's like when we were growing up, we opened the Jet and the Ebony. It's got to be truth, right? So that's where, if you're talking about educating young people, you got to get where young people are. And young people are into this electronic device. And all the government has to do in the next 10 years is turn this off, and they'll be lost. They'll be lost. So I said what I had to say, and happy holidays to everybody, okay? And have a good new year if I don't see you.
Thank you, Miss Donna. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up, but I'm glad that Mr. Rodney got you in there. But those are some very absolute valid points.
Well, I did want to point out a couple of things about tablets and screens. Even though we see that screens have proliferated education and households, screens are actually detrimental to our children's learning. There's multiple studies that show that you take children who read books, the old-fashioned books that you and I read, Donna, and children who are reading the same thing on the screen, and you give them a comprehension test, the children who were screen only have less comprehension than the children who actually read the old-fashioned book. And I want to point that out because, I believe in technology. I'm not a Luddite, right? But at the same token, we have to go with, and some people say, Rodney, put it all in rap music because they can learn rap lyrics like nobody's business, and put it in a video game. And I will say that there is a time and a place for that somewhat, but there's nothing better than old-fashioned books when it comes to our children developing the understanding of the material. And so I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, excellent topic. I do just want to let everyone know that we only have a short amount of time and we could talk about this topic and all of our topics for days. But if you have some suggestions or some things that you would like us to consider, like Miss Donna, she did give us some insights to think about and to talk about at another time, please offer your suggestions and we can talk about those topics as well. But really quick, what I wanted to say, Mr. Rodney, when you were talking, is that what came up for me is this conversation around, or the question of, what is the purpose of education? And that is a topic that even scholars in the literature that I'm reading have not been able to answer holistically and have like one foundational purpose that we all can agree upon for students. Like, what is the purpose? What are we, is it to learn government or not? Because we have students who are saying, I don't know anything about this. So that just reminded me of a controversy and a topic that I think is very powerful and important to learn. Because if we don't have a direction, then what are we doing? What are our students learning, and what is the purpose of what they're doing? So we've reached our 7:05 mark today. It's okay, we went a little over, but we want to thank you to everyone that joined on today. Thank you, Miss Donna, for your words. Thank you, Miss Amy, and thank you, Martin, for your conversation today. And for those who joined on, I want to say hi to Jane. Thank you so much. And Darlene, thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Kamilah Bywaters. I'm running for the Board of School Trustees in District E. I do not believe in banning books. And I believe that this should be a foundation of our work as leaders, and especially in education. If you have any questions for me, you can always contact me. My email is Kamilah4Nevadans@gmail.com. My website is KamilahForNevadans.com, and I will send all that information out. If you would like to have a personal Zoom with me or a coffee with me so we can discuss more, please schedule. Anyone else have last words?
Read.
I just want to say,
go ahead, Mark.
I just want to say to Don, I don't appreciate you attacking our age from our Jet magazine.
Hey, listen, I got the first Ebony ever published. Okay, leave me alone.
you got to age yourself, because we have to know what that is. So thank you.
Sometimes those folks come in handy. Y'all better appreciate sometimes.
Hey, you ain't wrong.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment?
I don't know if they still have the parent advisory committee meetings, or I guess it's SOT now or whatever, but I advise parents to figure out a way to go on their lunch hour and go sit with their principal, because that's what most principals will listen to. And you have direct contact with them.
Okay. Parent engagement, adults. And, I'm going to add something to it. Parent engagement is a necessity, but we have to have citizens engaged. Many of us are taxpayers, and one way or the other, we are supporting this education system. We have to be more, all of us have to be more engaged. We often say children are our future, but do we treat them when it comes to education like they are our future? And then my final comment, please read, even if it's for a few minutes a day, please read in front of your children. And if they're not your children, read in front of them too. Get something. It could be a comic book. It could be a graphic novel. Yes, it could be the Bible. Get something and read, because studies show that children who are around adults who read become readers themselves. Sister Kamilah, close us out.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are so excited that you decided to stop in on your Tuesday to share your time with us. We will see you. We have 2 more Tuesdays for the remainder of this year. So we'll see you next week, and we'll let you know what the topic will be. If you have any suggestions, you can also let us know. We look forward to seeing you again. Again, I'm Kamilah Bywaters, and I'm running for the Clark County Board of School Trustees in District E. Have a wonderful evening.
Good night.